Chapter 10. Jake couldn't pull his eyes away from Mackenzie, stacking the dishes from their meal in the sink. Her new tank was white and, fuck me, she wasn't wearing a bra. The curving outline of her generous breasts, the dusky shadows of her nipples, were enough to cause his head to spin. Every drop of blood in his body was now pulsing in his cock. Registering the intensity of his stare, she blushed, a pretty pink spreading across her cheeks. Would she flush like that when her legs were locked tight around his hips? Jake? She raised an eyebrow, and that slight smirk had him instantly imagining those lush lips wrapped around his. Earth to Jake. She rounded the kitchen counter to stand beside him, gently knocking her hip into the side of his thigh. You need an early night, buddy. She smelled warm and cinnamony, and goddamn his balls were aching. Here, I made you tea, he said. You know how I take my tea? 2 sugars, lots of creamer. Those big green eyes of hers studied him over the rim of the mug. Careful, Jake, you're showing your hand. Babe, my hand is flat on the table, facing up. Jake shifted, nudging her back against the counter and stepping closer, until he swore she could feel the beat of his heart in his chest. But he didn't touch her. Not yet. You know I'm in love with you, Mac. The question is, how do you feel about that? He asked, low and husky. Her grip was unsteady as she placed the mug behind her, but he saw the fluttering pulse in the hollow of her neck. He recognized the banked desire in her heavily lidded eyes. He knew she was the other half of his soul, and because of this faith it was inconceivable she wouldn't feel the connection between them. Circumstance, age, history, they'd all worked against him. But now, with life stripped back and nothing between them, no significant others, no distracting friends, how could she not feel it? Jake, she breathed, hands fluttering at her sides before coming to rest against his chest. But she didn't exert any pressure, signaling he should step back, and he reveled in the knowledge. This is all kind of sudden, she hedged, biting on that plump lower lip. And fuck if he didn't want to suck it between his own lips. Because of Chloe, because of Peter. I just haven't ever what? I haven't ever thought of you that way before. Her eyes dipped to where her fingers were unconsciously kneading at his chest, kitten-like. She stilled. Don't stop, he urged gruffly. Mac blinked inky lashes, and the moment spun out between them, consuming and full of possibility. It feels wrong to be feeling like this. You're you. You're like my... Don't say it. I'm not your little brother. Does anything about me feel little to you? The need to pull her closer was overwhelming, but until she gave her consent to explore their ratcheting attraction, he held firm. This had been one-sided for too many years. Jake, can we talk about this in the morning? I'm exhausted and I can't think straight. Hiding his disappointment, he moved back, catching her hands as they fell. Whatever you need, I'm not going anywhere. He brought the backs of her hands to his mouth and softly kissed the almost translucent skin. Get a good night's sleep. I'll just switch off the lights and then turn in too. Where are you sleeping? Quinn has a spare bedroom. It's tiny as fuck, but the bed's comfortable enough. Do you think? She paused. You could sleep with me. She said it so quietly Jake almost thought he'd misheard. Motionless, he stared at her. I'm not coming on to you. Her eyes widened. I just don't want to be alone tonight. Of course, babe. Morning light was seeping beneath the bedroom blinds as Jake groaned softly, drawing Mackenzie's slumbering body tighter. Burying his head in the crook of her neck, he acknowledged that a stiff prick had no conscience. He'd promised himself she needed to make the next move. He was adamant he wouldn't push her. But Jesus fucking Christ. The soft, languid weight of her curled into him was more than any man could bear. Surely. Another groan reverberated through him. Jake needed to get out of bed before he did something he'd regret. Disentangling their legs, he slid from beneath the covers, pulling them up so they covered the exposed curve of Mackenzie's shoulder. Even her shoulder was sexy. Jake, she mumbled sleepily. What are you doing? Go back to sleep. I'm going to check out some of the neighboring houses and see if I can scavenge some food." At that, she sat up abruptly, the covers pooling at her waist. "You're leaving?" "I won't be long. Quinn's always whining about a neighbor's rooster crowing at ungodly hours. Feel like eggs for breakfast?" She visibly relaxed. "Just be careful, okay? And don't be too long." "I'll be back before you know it," he promised, pulling on the jeans he'd discarded last night. Jake didn't miss the way she watched the flexing of his thighs and hid a grin. Heading downstairs, he collected a shopping bag and tied a clean bandana around his face. He knew the evac area was supposedly deserted, but it was better to be safe than sorry. Outside there was a chill to the air, a deceptive stillness. Sanford was at once the town he'd grown up in, and an unknown entity. Where 48 hours ago cars would be leaving driveways heading to work, school buses would be making their rounds, and joggers would be pounding the sidewalks. Now all was quiet. Jake tried to remember which poet had coined the famous quote about the world ending not with a bang, but a whimper. English had never been his strength at school. Regardless, the undeniable truth of the poem was jarring. Looking up and down the empty street, he turned to the right, deciding it would be best to check each house methodically. Quinn's neighbor had a neatly kept front yard with a rolled-up newspaper still sitting on the front porch. Picking it up, Jake noted it was from 3 days ago, the headline shouting about a celebrity who'd been sentenced to 14 days in prison because of some college admission scandal. Nothing at all about the virus that was about to annihilate humanity. It was incredible that the media outlets had been so willing to fall in line with the president's complete denial of Psi V. Raising his hand, he knocked at the front door and was immediately chagrined. There would be no one home. They were in the safe zone, or dead. Absently, he wondered how long it would take for old habits to be replaced by this new reality. Sanford was a small town with little to no security concerns, and the doorknob turned, unlocked. Before he could set foot inside, a putrid stench of decomposition overcame him. Instantaneous retching had him gagging behind his bandana as he fell backward, slamming the door closed. Tears ran unchecked down his cheeks as he spat compulsively onto the ground, desperate to erase an odor so pervasive he could taste it. Stumbling to the street, he collapsed into the gutter, shaking legs unable to hold him standing as he gulped deeply of the clean air. There was a huge distinction between knowing he could encounter dead bodies and actually encountering them. Surely that person, people, had been dead longer than the 2 days they'd known of the virus? Or did the virus make them decompose quicker? It was several long moments before Jake had the strength to stand and the will to continue on. Pausing at the front door to the next house, he steeled himself for what lay beyond before cautiously opening it, sniffing at the air with a curled top lip. The relief at not being hit in the face with a decomposing human body was palpable. Shutting the door gently, he ventured down a hallway lined with photos, although he couldn't place the family. He wasn't sure if knowing or not knowing them would be easier as he walked through their home. Several pairs of shoes littered the floor, and the kitchen still had dirty breakfast dishes in the sink. Resolutely blocking out the personal details of the house, Jake went straight for the refrigerator and began loading his bag. The pantry had slim pickings, but there were canned vegetables and tuna. It was the third house where he found the chicken coop out back, along with a verdant and well-ordered vegetable garden. Reaching under clucky hens, he collected several eggs, already debating whether he should poach or scramble them. Handily, an egg basket sat outside the coop so he could carry them back to Quinn's. Feeling on a roll, he chanced one more house before heading back to Mackenzie. She had a sweet tooth, and he wasn't above using chocolate to fight his way into her affections. He headed straight to the back door and was relieved to find it open, although learning how to pick locks was fast climbing to the top of his priority list. The kitchen cupboards were well stocked, but no chocolate, and Jake's bag was full before he'd even started on the second shelf. He just clocked the stack of dog food cans when the clicking of nails on the hardwood floor preceded a warning growl that had his balls shriveling. "Hey boy," he murmured in a low voice, slowly turning to face the dog. A large German shepherd crouched in the doorway, hackles raised and teeth bared. The growl escalated to a snarl, and Jake continued soothing platitudes at the canine while frantically evaluating escape options. He'd have to cross the dog's path to make it out the back, and it was blocking the doorway to the front. There was only one other door, and Jake hoped, it led to the garage. "Easy, boy, easy," he said, slowly backing toward it. The German Shepherd tracked his movements, and when it lunged forward on powerful hind legs, Jake flung himself through the door, slamming it just as the weight of the dog crashed into it. Panting, Jake looked around the dim interior, confirming it was a garage. To the soundtrack of frantic barking, he located a light switch and found the space empty, save a golf bag, a stepladder, and some gardening implements. When the bare bulb illuminating the room flickered and then went out, he swore. Blown bulb, or had the electricity gone out? Striding to the automatic garage door, he ran his hand along the wall, searching for a button to open it. The dog was now ferociously scratching at the door, and when Jake's hand finally ran across the button, he jabbed at it anxiously. Nothing happened. The electricity was out. But surely there was a way to manually open it. Frustration clawed at him. He should have gone back to Mackenzie after the third house. He'd already been gone longer than he'd planned. Setting down his bag of food, Jake grabbed the stepladder and studied the door, finally seeing what looked to be an emergency cord hanging from the center rail of the garage door mechanism. Pulling it, he expected the cord to disconnect the door from the garage door opener, allowing him to lift it open. Jumping from the stepladder, he pulled at the bottom of the door, to no avail. Fuck! He tried the cord again, and while it swung from the urgency of his action, the door stayed resolutely shut. He slid to the ground, bowing his head between bent knees. He should have followed his gut and stayed in bed with Mackenzie. Screw the consequences. Pun intended. He sighed. Why was everything so damn hard? Nothing was easy anymore. He prided himself on being resilient and practical. But was it too much to ask for a simple home ransacking to go to plan? Jake could wait for the electricity to come back on, assuming it would, or find a weapon of some description and brave the dog. It was the thought of Mackenzie panicking at his longer-than-expected absence that had him getting to his feet and finding a garden shovel. The idea of maiming an animal made him grimace, but the option of being mauled to death wasn't especially appealing either. Glancing back at the shopping bag, he decided he'd have a better chance of escaping unharmed without trying to carry it as well, as much as he hated the thought of returning empty-handed. The door was shuddering as though the dog were throwing itself against it. Bracing himself, Jake raised the shovel and prepared to open it quickly. He hoped he'd startle the dog into charging into the garage while he was shielded behind the door, and he could slip past back into the house. Because everything else has gone so smoothly, he muttered wryly to himself. Rolling his shoulders, Jake took a deep breath, and then hesitated. Exactly how much would a dog bite hurt? He imagined its teeth were sharp enough to puncture cleanly through. It was the ripping and tearing of his flesh as the German Shepherd pulled away that was concerning. Fuck it. Gripping the door handle, he pulled down, only to find it locked. It had locked automatically from the inside. "You have got to be fucking kidding me!" he roared. Trapped, he turned in a slow circle around the garage, assessing his options. They were few. Resuming his sitting position, as far from the snarling beast as possible, he cursed not having the ability to search the internet on his phone. Jake could understand telecommunication going down in an apocalypse, but surely it was just human decency to allow the internet to live on. How was anyone meant to know anything without it? He was pretty sure there weren't going to be books in Sanford Town Library telling him how to pick locks. Not that he could get to the library in his current predicament. T.S. Eliot. Remembering the name of the poet, he let out a whimper.